In the early morning of May 19, 1919, a man named Samuel Pritchard walked into the post office in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and asked to send a telegram. The clerk, Mrs. Helena Voss, would later tell the county recorder that she recognized him immediately, though she had not seen him in 3 years. She said his hands shook when he wrote the address. She said he smelled of wood smoke and something else she couldn't name. She said he looked at her only once, and that his eyes were the eyes of someone who had stopped sleeping. The telegram was addressed to his mother in Lewiston. It read, "Alive, coming home, Sam." Mrs. Voss asked him if he needed anything. He said no. She asked him where he had been. He said nothing. She asked him about the others. There had been others, she said, 5 men total, all from the Northern Territories, all gone into the Cabinet Mountains in August of 1916 on a privately financed geological survey that was supposed to last 8 weeks. It had been 34 months. Samuel Pritchard looked at her and said, "I can't talk about it." He left the post office and walked to the train station. He bought a ticket with money no one knew he had. He sat on a bench with his back to the wall and did not move until the train arrived 6 hours later. The Lewiston Morning Tribune published a single-column notice on May 22, 1919. Local man returns after 3 years missing. It listed no details. It mentioned no other names. By the time the article appeared, Samuel Pritchard had already refused 2 interviews. One with the county sheriff, and one with a representative of the geological concern that had funded the expedition. Both men reported the same thing. Pritchard would not speak. Not about the mountains, not about the weather, not about the 4 men who had not come back. His mother, Mary Pritchard, told her neighbor that Samuel had returned thinner, quieter, and that he no longer met her eyes when she spoke to him. She said he spent hours in the cellar where it was dark. She said he asked her not to open the curtains during the day. A local physician, Dr. Amos Harland, examined him at the family's request in early June. His notes, preserved in the county historical archives, describe Pritchard as physically intact, but exhibiting profound nervous exhaustion. Dr. Harland noted scarring on Pritchard's hands and forearms consistent with exposure to cold and rough terrain. He noted evidence of malnutrition, though Pritchard's weight had partially recovered. He noted that Pritchard did not respond to questions about the expedition and that he appeared to become agitated when the subject was raised. Dr. Harlan wrote, "The patient exhibits no sign of delirium or mania. He is lucid, oriented, and capable of rational speech. His refusal to discuss the events of the past 3 years appears to be volitional. When pressed, he becomes silent and turns his face away. I do not believe this is amnesia. I believe this is choice." By the end of June, the families of the other 4 men had begun to arrive in Coeur d'Alene. They wanted answers. They wanted closure. They wanted to know if there were bodies to retrieve, graves to visit, reasons to mourn, or reasons to hope. Samuel Pritchard met with none of them. His mother told Mrs. Voss, who told the county clerk, who told a reporter from Spokane, that Samuel had said only one thing about the mountains. They didn't suffer. When asked what he meant, he did not answer. The expedition had been organized in the spring of 1916 by a private concern called the Intermountain Geological and Minerals Survey, a short-lived firm based in Spokane with financial backing from East Coast investors interested in copper and silver deposits rumored to exist in the unmapped regions of the Northern Rockies. The firm hired 5 men for an 8-week survey of the upper drainages of the Clark Fork and Priest River systems, areas where few trappers ventured and fewer still returned with reliable maps. The men were Samuel Pritchard, 23, a surveyor's assistant with experience in forestry work, unmarried, raised in Lewiston, known as reliable, quiet, and good with maps. Thomas Harwell, 31, the expedition leader, a geologist from Pennsylvania with a degree from Lehigh University, married, no children, described in correspondence as methodical and overly cautious. James Cobb, 28, a packer and wilderness guide from Missoula, married with 1 daughter, known for his humor and his ability to keep morale high on difficult treks. Owen Fairchild, 26, a mining engineer from Butte, unmarried, a heavy drinker according to later testimony, but competent in the field. Lyle Eccles, 34, a camp cook and general laborer, widowed. Few records remain of his life before the expedition, but those who knew him described him as steady and unbothered by solitude. They departed Coeur d'Alene on August 14, 1916, with pack mules, surveying equipment, firearms, and provisions for 10 weeks. They carried letters of introduction from the U.S. Forest Service and a contract stipulating payment upon completion of topographical maps and mineral assay reports. Photographs from the departure show 5 men standing beside a freight wagon. Samuel Pritchard is on the far left, hat pulled low, face serious. Thomas Harwell stands in the center, hand on the wagon's side, posture upright. James Cobb is laughing at something out of frame. Owen Fairchild is looking at the camera but not smiling. Lyle Eccles is slightly out of focus, half-turned, as if he had started to walk away before the shutter closed. Letters sent by the men during the first 3 weeks describe good weather, clear progress, and promising topography. Thomas Harwell wrote to his wife on August 29, 1916, "We have mapped 11 miles of ridge and identified 3 potential copper seams. The men are in good spirits. Pritchard is invaluable. He reads the land better than I read books." James Cobb sent a postcard to his daughter on September 3, 1916. It showed a hand-drawn picture of a mountain and a stick-figure man waving. He wrote, "Miss you, little bird. I'll bring you a rock that sparkles." The last confirmed communication from the expedition was a supply requisition sent by Runner to a forestry outpost on September 9, 1916. It requested additional rope, lamp oil, and dried meat. The runner, a teenage boy named Peter Lund, later testified that the men seemed normal and in no distress. He said Thomas Harwell paid him $5 and told him they would be out of the mountains by mid-October. Peter Lund never saw them again. By late October, when the men had not returned and no further communication had been received, the Intermountain Geological and Mineral Survey contacted the families. A search party was organized in early November, but early snowfall made the upper ranges impassable. The search was postponed until spring. In April 1917, a second search party entered the mountains. They found the remains of 2 campsites, both abandoned. They found surveying stakes, torn canvas, a broken tripod, and a single boot, later identified as belonging to Owen Fairchild. They found no bodies. They found no notes. They found no indication of where the men had gone or why they had left their equipment behind. The search was called off in May 1917. The men were presumed dead. Families grieved. Insurance claims were filed. The Intermountain Geological and Minerals Survey dissolved in 1918. And then, in May 1919, Samuel Pritchard walked into a post office and sent a telegram. Reconstructing what happened in the Cabinet Mountains between September 1916 and May 1919 requires assembling fragments, testimonies from searchers, weather records, the physical evidence left behind, and the few words Samuel Pritchard allowed to escape before his silence became absolute. The forestry outpost runner, Peter Lund, placed the expedition in a high basin near the headwaters of Granite Creek on September 9, 1916. Weather records from the region show that the first significant snowfall occurred on September 21st, 2 weeks later. Temperatures dropped rapidly in late September, and by early October the mountain passes would have been difficult to navigate. The search party of April 1917 found the first campsite approximately 12 miles west of Granite Creek, at an elevation of roughly 6,200 feet. The site showed evidence of organized departure. Supplies cached under stones, tent poles neatly stacked, a fire pit cold but carefully constructed. The second campsite, found 3 miles farther west, was different. The canvas had been torn, not folded. Supplies were scattered. A surveying tripod had been snapped in half and left in the dirt. One of the searchers, a man named Carl Osborne, later told a newspaper that he believed the second site had been abandoned in haste. He said it looked like the men had run from something. When asked what, he said he didn't know. He said the mountains were full of bears, rock slides, bad weather. He said men could panic for 100 reasons. Another searcher, Frank Duval, disagreed. He said the site looked like the men had fought with each other. He pointed to the broken equipment, the scattered supplies. He said he found no blood, no spent shells, no sign of a predator. He said it looked like anger, not fear. No one found bodies. Samuel Pritchard, when questioned by the county sheriff in May 1919, was asked if the men had separated intentionally. He did not answer. He was asked if there had been an accident. He did not answer. He was asked if anyone had been injured. He did not answer. He was asked if he had left the others behind. He looked at the sheriff and said, "No." He was asked where the others were. He said, "I don't know." He was asked if they were alive when he last saw them. He turned his face to the wall and said nothing. The sheriff wrote in his report, "Subject refuses cooperation. No evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Case suspended pending further information." No further information came. Dr. Harlan, during his June examination, attempted a gentler approach. He asked Samuel Pritchard if he had been alone in the mountains. Pritchard said yes. He asked for how long. Pritchard said he didn't remember. He asked if Pritchard had tried to find the others. Pritchard closed his eyes and said, "Yes." Dr. Harlan asked if Pritchard had succeeded. Pritchard opened his eyes. He said, "I didn't want to." Dr. Harlan did not press further. In the autumn of 1919, James Cobb's widow, Nora Cobb, traveled from Missoula to Lewiston and knocked on the door of the Pritchard home. She was accompanied by her daughter, who was 6 years old. Mary Pritchard answered. According to a letter Mrs. Cobb later wrote to her sister, Mary Pritchard wept when she saw the child and invited them inside. Samuel Pritchard was in the cellar. Mary called for him. He came upstairs. He saw Nora Cobb and the child and stopped in the doorway. Nora Cobb asked him if James had died quickly. Samuel Pritchard looked at the child. He looked at Nora Cobb. He said, "Yes." Nora Cobb asked if James had said anything before he died. Samuel Pritchard said, "He loved you. He said to tell you that." Nora Cobb asked where he was buried. Samuel Pritchard said nothing. Nora Cobb asked if there was a grave. Samuel Pritchard said, "No." Nora Cobb asked why not. Samuel Pritchard looked at the floor. He said, "I'm sorry." He turned and went back down to the cellar. He did not come up again, even when Nora Cobb and her daughter left. In her letter to her sister, Nora Cobb wrote, "He was lying. I don't know which part, but he was lying. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. But I saw his face and I know what a man looks like when he is carrying something he can't put down." In the years following his return, Samuel Pritchard lived quietly. He worked intermittently as a surveyor's assistant on projects close to Lewiston, though he refused any work that required him to travel into the mountains. He attended church irregularly. He did not marry. He spoke to few people, and those he did speak to learned quickly not to ask questions. In 1921, the father of Owen Fairchild, a man named George Fairchild, hired a private investigator named Raymond Kreitz to interview Samuel Pritchard and determine what had happened to his son. Kreitz traveled to Lewiston and spent 2 weeks attempting to gain Pritchard's confidence. He bought him meals. He offered him money. He appealed to his conscience, his sense of duty, his Christian obligation to bring peace to grieving families. Samuel Pritchard refused to speak. In his final report to George Fairchild, Kreitz wrote, "Subject is not hostile, not evasive in the traditional sense. He simply will not engage. When questioned about the expedition, he becomes silent and still, as if the part of him that might answer has gone somewhere else. I do not believe he is protecting himself. I believe he is protecting someone or something, though I cannot say what." George Fairchild paid Kreitz and let the matter rest. In 1923, a journalist from the Spokane Chronicle named Daniel Mercer attempted to write a feature on the disappearance. He contacted Samuel Pritchard by letter, requesting an interview. Pritchard did not respond. Mercer traveled to Lewiston and approached Pritchard outside the offices of a surveying firm where he was employed. Mercer later described the encounter in his notes. "I identified myself and explained that I wanted to tell the story of the 5 men who went into the mountains. I told him the families deserved to know. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, You can't tell a story that doesn't have an ending. I asked him if he could give me the ending. He said, no, because it's still happening. Mercer asked him what he meant. Samuel Pritchard walked away. Mercer published his article without an interview. It ran in November 1923 under the headline, "The Man Who Came Back and the Four Who Didn't, a Mystery of the Northern Rockies." The article included testimonies from family members, excerpts from the search party reports, and a brief description of Samuel Pritchard's refusal to cooperate. It concluded with a question. What happened in the mountains in the winter of 1916, and why won't the only man who knows refuse to say? The article generated minor public interest. A few letters were sent to the newspaper suggesting theories. An avalanche, a mining accident, murder, insanity, cannibalism. None of the theories could be substantiated. None of the families pursued further inquiry. The story faded. In 1927, Samuel Pritchard's mother, Mary, fell ill with pneumonia. She died in early December. Samuel was alone in the house when she passed. Neighbors who attended the funeral said he seemed composed, even distant, as if grief had become something he carried so constantly it no longer showed on his face. Among Mary Pritchard's personal effects, her executor found a sealed envelope addressed, "To be opened after my death." Inside was a single sheet of paper with a note in Mary's handwriting. The note read, "Samuel told me once in 1920 that he had made a promise. He said he couldn't break it, even though it was killing him. I asked him who he made the promise to. He said, to the only one who's left. I didn't understand. I still don't, but I believe him." The executor, a family lawyer named Howard Venn, showed the note to Samuel. Samuel read it, folded it carefully, and placed it in his coat pocket. He thanked Mr. Venn and left. The note was never seen again. In 1929, the United States government conducted a comprehensive survey of the Northern Rockies as part of an expanded forestry and conservation effort. Surveyors working in the Cabinet Mountains reported finding a small cairn of stacked stones at an elevation of approximately 7,400 feet, far above the tree line. Beneath the cairn was a shallow depression that might have been a grave, though no remains were found. Nearby, carved into the surface of a granite outcrop, were 5 initials: TH, JC, OF, LE, SP. The surveyors filed a report noting the discovery. A copy was sent to the families of the missing men. A copy was sent to Samuel Pritchard. He did not respond. A reporter from the Lewiston Morning Tribune attempted to contact him for comment. Pritchard's landlord said he had moved. No forwarding address was given. Samuel Pritchard disappeared from public record in 1930. The disappearance of 4 men in the Cabinet Mountains in 1916 is not unique in the annals of the American wilderness. Men vanished regularly in those years, lost to weather, terrain, animals, accidents, and the occasional act of violence. What makes the case unusual is not the disappearance itself, but the survival of Samuel Pritchard and his refusal across more than a decade to explain what happened. Silence of this kind invites speculation. The families speculated. The authorities speculated. The public speculated. But speculation, however detailed, is not knowledge. And knowledge, in this case, died with Samuel Pritchard. Or perhaps it never left the mountains at all. What can be reconstructed with certainty is limited. 5 men entered the wilderness in August 1916. 1 man returned in May 1919. 4 did not. The returning man exhibited signs of severe psychological distress, refused to discuss the events of the intervening years, and spent the remainder of his known life avoiding the mountains, avoiding questions, and avoiding, it seems, himself. The question is not whether something happened. Something always happens. The question is whether Samuel Pritchard's silence was the silence of guilt, of trauma, of loyalty, or of something else entirely. Dr. Harlan's notes suggest that Pritchard was not incapable of speech, but unwilling. Nora Cobb believed he was lying, or at least withholding. Raymond Kreitz believed he was protecting someone. Mary Pritchard believed he had made a promise. All of these interpretations may be correct. None of them are provable. What remains is the testimony of absence. The scattered camp, the broken equipment, the cairn of stones with 5 initials carved into granite. The man who came back, and the men who didn't. The words spoken, and the words withheld. The families who grieved without knowing. The man who lived without explaining. In 1931, a fire destroyed much of the records archive in Lewiston, including Samuel Pritchard's employment records, medical files, and personal correspondence. What little remains is housed in the Nez Perce County Historical Society and the Idaho State Archives. Researchers seeking to learn more about the 1916 expedition will find only fragments: photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, a few witness statements, and a great deal of silence. The silence is not empty. It has weight. It has shape. It presses down on the historical record like snow on a ridgeline, obscuring what lies beneath. There is a theory, unsupported by evidence but consistent with the known facts, that the 5 men did not all survive the first winter. There is a theory that decisions were made about food, about shelter, about who would live and who would not. There is a theory that Samuel Pritchard made those decisions, or witnessed them, or benefited from them, and that his silence was the silence of a man who could not reconcile survival with the cost of surviving. There is another theory, equally unsupported, that the men did survive, longer than anyone believed possible, and that something happened in those extended months that fractured them, that Samuel Pritchard left not because the others were dead, but because staying would have required him to become something he could not bear to become. There is a third theory, quieter than the others, that Samuel Pritchard kept his silence not to protect himself, but to protect the memory of the men who did not return, that there was something in the mountains, hunger, desperation, betrayal, madness, that he did not want their families to know, that the lie he told Nora Cobb, that James Cobb had died quickly, that he had spoken of love, was a kindness, that silence in this case was not cowardice but mercy. None of these theories can be confirmed. All of them are speculation, and speculation, no matter how carefully constructed, is not truth. What is true is this: Samuel Pritchard returned. He did not speak, and when he disappeared again, this time by choice, he took with him the only account that mattered. The mountains do not speak, the dead do not speak, and the living sometimes choose not to. The historian's task is to assemble what can be known and to mark the boundaries of what cannot. In this case, the boundary is clear. On one side, the documented departure of 5 men. On the other, the return of 1. In between, 34 months of silence. That silence is the story. It is not satisfying. It does not provide closure. It does not answer the questions the families asked, the questions the authorities asked, the questions we ask now, more than a century later. But it is what remains. In 1954, a man named Samuel Pritchard died in a county hospital in Boise, Idaho. The death certificate lists his age as 61, his occupation as laborer, his next of kin as none. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the Morris Hill Cemetery. No service was held. No obituary was published. A nurse who attended him in his final days later told a local historian that he had been delirious near the end, that he had spoken in his sleep. She said he repeated the same words over and over. "I kept my promise. I kept my promise." She said she asked him when he was lucid what promise he meant. He looked at her, she said, and smiled. And then he closed his eyes and did not open them again.